The day went by until classes were eventually over. But unlike the other students, I had to stay over a little longer to get something done. I knocked on the door of the student council room. I waited till I heard a "come in" from inside and proceeded to step in. When I entered, I saw the president of the student council, Sona Shitori Senpai, who seemed to be busy doing paperwork, working hard as always. I took a look around the room as I walked in. Now this is something new. Usually there are more members of the student council in here, but right now there's only Senpai. "Oh, Emiya-kun, you still haven't left?" The short-haired girl asked me curiously, straightening her glasses. I waved my hand in denial and started searching in my backpack. I wanted to, but I had to give this back to you before I did. I told her as I took a book out of my backpack and placed it in front of her. "You already read it?" She gave me a curious look. "Was this one more interesting than the previous one?" I gave her a nod. Yeah, while I am not a fan of occult-based stories, the plot line was really interesting. I really liked when the protagonist managed to save all his friends and loved ones. I elaborated to her. I don't know exactly when it happened, but after I helped the student council with a few random things in the past, the girl in front of me gave me a book as a reward. Since then we kept exchanging books and comparing them. I think we are what people could call book buddies. I was surprised as well. I would have never expected him to save them considering how the storyline was going, but I guess I can't be unsatisfied with a happy ending. She told me, a very subtle, almost microscopic smile forming on her lips, which was something quite rare. Most students call Shitori Senpai an ice queen that doesn't smile. I was a bit scared of her at first, but she is actually quite a nice person to be around once you get to know her. I think there was a word that described the kind of person she is. What was it called again? Cooter? Or was it dander? I'll figure it out later. Also, I must be sure never to call her either of those words to her face. Something from the back of my mind is telling me that if I do, I will surely regret it. Getting off that thought, I went back to reality. "Do you have anything new for me?" I asked her eagerly. She always seems able to find rare books that I have never heard of before, but they're still interesting nevertheless. She arranged her glasses and took a book out from her drawer, a rather old-looking one. "I think you will like this one. I noticed you have a thing for hero stories," she told me as she handed me the book. "When should I bring it back?" I asked her. I do actually know when to bring it back, but it doesn't hurt to confirm. "Like always, when you're done reading it," she told me. I nodded. I found it quite interesting. I especially enjoyed when the main character. Stop. I threw my hand forward and cut her off instantly. "No spoilers," I told her firmly. I swear that stories lose their appeal when you know what will happen before you read it yourself. "Oh, spoil my fun." She chuckled lightly, which was something as rare as a solar eclipse. I think that if some of the students heard that chuckle, they would be running in mayhem screaming that the end is near. I don't know how, but the next words slipped my lips. "You know, I really can't understand Issei when he tells me that you're a shady person." I admitted, sometimes I just don't get the guy. Whenever he hears that I talk to Shitori Senpai, he always begins telling me that he feels a malevolent, if not demonic, aura around her. Now, just how absurd is that? I presume you are referring to Issei Ryudo, not Issei Hyodo, am I correct? I nodded at her question. It was a bit confusing since those two have similar names. I don't want to gossip or randomly speculate, but I think that Ryudo-kun is still bitter towards me for winning the elections last year with quite a difference of number in votes. She speculated, and knowing Issei, that's probably it. I guess it is better that he transferred to a different school when we became second years. He always seemed to have a hard time dealing with girls, and Kuo Academy, my current school, had quite a large female population. Which honestly made complete sense since it was originally a girls-only school. I took a look at the clock on the wall. Damn. Sorry, Shitori Senpai, it's kinda late and I need to get home. I admitted. Sella did have a bit of a fixation about timing. That Anilia would question me where I was, and of course Eri would then start her own little scenarios that I was busy seducing girls. Thank God that at least Liz is normal. If she joined in with the others, I highly doubt my sanity would still be intact. Have a nice day then. She waved her hand goodbye to me as I left the room. The school sure feels different when there aren't people around. When I reached the corner of the hall, I bumped into something, or more precisely someone. Kaya, a girl yelled. I looked down and saw who the person that I knocked down was. It was our school's so-called idol, one of the so-called Kuo Academy's two great ladies, Rias Grimoire Senpai. Thank God that there aren't any students around. If the guys saw that I pushed down their so-called idol, they would surely be after my skin. As for the girls, some things were better left unsaid. This was just one of the many mysteries about women that I have a hard time comprehending. I mean, most students adore the very ground she walks on, without her even doing anything besides looking good, as Shitori Senpai quoted. Sorry, I wasn't looking where I was going. Are you hurt? I apologized to the red-haired girl, hoping that she didn't hurt herself when she fell. She looked up at me. She didn't seem to be angry, just a bit surprised. No, I am fine, she informed me as she got up and dusted her skirt. At least she wasn't hurt, much to my relief. Because I was so focused on her, I didn't notice that there was another girl behind her. For a second I thought I just saw Ilya, but I was wrong. It was just a girl that surprisingly closely resembled her. Curiously, she was carrying a cardboard box in her arms. She was staring at me quite strongly. Well, I did technically push down her friend, so I can get why she seems rather annoyed. Are you alright, Bucho? She asked her taller companion. Don't worry, Kaneko, I am fine. Though our materials don't seem to be doing as well, she told her, but that didn't stop her white-haired friend from staring at me. Was there something on my face or something? I looked down at my legs and noticed what Grimoire Senpai was referring to. On the floor were dozens of scattered flyers with a type of magical circle on them, kind of like the ones you see in horror movies. Now that I recall, I think that Grimoire Senpai is the president of the Occult Research Club, so it wouldn't be too far-fetched for them to have occult-looking stuff. I then realized what happened. When I knocked down the red-haired girl in front of me, I also made her drop her box, and the contents then proceeding to scatter all over the floor. I knelt down and quickly began picking them up. Sorry, I made a mess out of your things. I apologized. It's no problem at all, accidents do happen, she told me with an amused smile. If only this kind of accident would happen less often to me, everything would be fine. Why yeah, I let out a dry chuckle. Well, it was rather forced, but still. Here you go, Senpai. I handed her box back with all the flyers inside it again. She gave me a curious look. She took one of the flyers and put it in my hand. Keep one. Perhaps it will help you one day, she told me with a smile. Weird, for some reason her smile seemed rather, what's the word, devilish. The older girl soon began walking again, with her much smaller friend following suit, both of them leaving me behind. That's all. I was expecting something more. I don't know, violent. ... Better stop thinking about it, before I manage to jinx myself. I shrugged my shoulders and put the flyer in the right pocket of my pants. The city sure is quiet around this hour, though it's a nice and peaceful most of the time anyway. It sure is different from big cities like Tokyo, where you can't find a quiet street. As I continued to walk, I noticed someone in the distance. I couldn't really make out his face very well because the sun was setting right behind him, so the light was making it a bit difficult to do so. As we both got closer to each other, I got the chance to take a better look at him. It was a guy, around my age if not a bit older. He had silver hair, blue eyes, fair skin, and was wearing nice casual clothes that fit him quite well. Our eyes met. I raised my hand up high to wave to him. Hey there, Valley. I greeted him casually. His eyes seemed to soften a little as he saw me. Oh, hey there, Emiya. He greeted me with a shrug, his face painted with boredom as always. Going out to that ramen place again? I asked him. This was pretty much the interaction between us. We kept bumping into each other at a ramen stand downtown. At first we would both mind our business, but after a while we started talking to each other since we were both eating alone and it was kind of boring. Don't really have much of a choice in the matter. My old man can't cook to save his own skin. He told me with a lethargic sigh. Oh yeah, now that I think about it, he did tell me that his so-called guardian is a walking disaster in the kitchen. On one occasion he even somehow burned down the kitchen when he tried to boil some water for tea, which reminds me of Kuritsugu to be honest. I respect my father figure more than anyone in the world, but for all that's holy and sacred, Kuritsugu must never be allowed to enter a kitchen. Thank God Sella and Eri banned him for life from the kitchen, otherwise I think the house would have turned to ashes by now. You could always try and learn how to cook yourself, you know. I suggested to the silver-haired boy. I managed to learn how to cook, and I was far from talented when I first began. Yeah right. He chuckled as he began walking. See you around. You know, I can't help but wonder. Even if he doesn't know how to cook or has some other excuse, that doesn't explain why he always goes to the same local diner. Maybe it's just my imagination, but maybe, just maybe, he is too proud to admit that he just likes ramen. Perhaps I should ask him next time we meet there. Wait, now that I think about, I don't even know Valley's family name, now I feel awkward. I'm home, I greeted as I entered my house. No answer, I guess that means everyone else is out, but the door was unlocked. Let's see if there's someone in the kitchen after I lock the door. Yep, I was right. Sella was in the kitchen and was washing the dishes. Welcome back, she greeted me as she placed one of the plates in the dish dryer. I took a look around and noticed the unusual silence in the house. I couldn't help but wonder about it. Only you're home, Sella? I asked her as I grabbed a glass of juice from the fridge and took a seat at the table. Can't you see that? She answered with a rather irritated tone. Guess she didn't like to state the obvious. I sighed, wondering why Sella always acts so cold and harsh towards me when we're alone. Single quote. So where is everyone? Liz took out Ilya-san and Miyu-san to the park. Also your mother is still at her appointment. She stated simply, her eyes never leaving the plate she was washing. I see, so it's just the two of us. I nodded to myself. Well, this sure is rare for me, at home with only Sella and I here. Even though I've known Sella for a long time, I can't really say that I know her all that well. So how was your day, Sella? I asked her a bit awkwardly, trying to initiate some small talk. Fine as always, she replied uninterestedly. Silence echoed throughout the room. A minute passed, then 5, then 10. I could only sigh and change my attention to my glass of juice. Sella continued to wash the dishes, her eyes looking rather focused on something. My guess is that she is wondering what she should make for dinner later. While she was putting another dish in the dryer, her body seemed to completely freeze. It happened so quickly I couldn't help but wonder if something was wrong. And no, it can't be, she muttered, her voice shaking. Her skin became even paler than it already was. Her face was covered in bullets of sweat and back filled with tension. I might not the brightest bulb in the room when it comes to reading people, but I do have enough of an instinct to tell me that something was very wrong to cause Sella to freeze up like that. Sella, is something wrong? I asked her. The concern could be clearly heard in my voice. She looked directly at my eyes, her eyes were trembling, and her lips were quivering. She stood there silently for a few moments before finally talking. Shuru, she bit her trembling lower lip. Get out of the house, she told me in a slow, cold tone. Huh, I blinked in surprise. Did I just hear her right? Get out now, she told me again. This time she shouted at me. Wait, what did I do? I got up from my seat in fear and confusion. I know I have a tendency to get under her nerves and do stupid things, but I didn't do anything this time. Even if I did something wrong, she would normally just smack the daylights out of me, but she would never act like this. She ran in front of me and grabbed me by the collar, trying to drag me away. Damn it, Shuru, go now before it's too late, she told me harshly. Just what in the world is going on? I'm afraid it's already too late. A new voice cut into our conversation in a calm manner. Both Sela and I froze in place. We slowly turned our heads toward the source of the voice and were greeted by the sight of a man. He was a tall man in his late 20s, dressed in a black tuxedo with an ash trench coat over it. Judging by the shade of his messy brown hair, his blue eyes, and considering his facial traits, he was probably of European descent. Who are you and how did you get in the house? I asked nervously. Was this guy some kind of thief? No, forget that. Just how did this man enter our house without Sela or I noticing it? The man stared at me for a few seconds before nodding slowly as if remembering something. Oh my, where are my manners? I am Andrei Nekulai, 7th head of the Nekulai house, a humble magician. He presented himself in a formal yet elegant manner while doing a small bow. Magician. I blinked confused, wondering if the man in front of me was right in the head. I took a quick glance at Sela. She was frowning hard, but this was different from her normal irritated ones. Her eyes slowly met mine as she spoke. Shuru, run away, he's dangerous. This made me gasp in shock. I saw Sela angry before, many times in fact, but she wasn't just angry right now. I could see it in her eyes, she was scared. This made me realize just how dangerous the current situation was right now. I'm sorry, but the lad isn't going anywhere. Andrei told her with a calm tone, yet there was something else mixed in it, something I had never experienced before nor saw. However, for some reason I was able to recognize it. It was bloodlust filled with animosity. Sela stiffened for a few moments. She took in a deep breath, seeming to calm down and regained her posture. I could only speculate that in this kind of situation losing your cool was most likely dangerous. What do you want from us? She asked in cold yet calm manner. It's simple, he replied, a vicious smile forming on his face making the previous noble air around him disappear. I want revenge against the man who ruined my family. Sela swallowed hard, the fear from earlier returning. So it's about Kuritsugu-sama. My eyes widened in surprise from what I just heard. What does Dad have to do with this guy? The man took a few steps forward, his eyes analyzing the room he was in. I must say I was surprised when I found out that the Magus killer lived in such a place. I was expecting something more dark and somber. He admitted, shrugging his shoulders, but more importantly, just who the hell is this Magus killer? Sela narrowed her eyes, not letting a single move from him escape from her sight. If you know what kind of man he is, you must also know that what you're doing now will only get yourself killed. Perhaps, he admitted dryly. The next moment his face was painted with frustration and rage. But I can't just stand down after the humiliation he brought to the Nekulai family. I can't take it anymore. The situation is getting way too weird and confusing for me to simply keep silent. Just what the hell is going on here, Sela? I shouted confused while staring at Andrei. What does this guy have to do with Dad? Idiot. Sela hissed in frustration. I knew that look she just threw me. It was the one she shows when I do something utterly stupid. Did I just say something wrong? I took a quick look at Andrei. He seemed a bit surprised, but then a wicked grin formed on his face. I felt a cold shiver ran down my spine as he looked at me. So you are the Magus killer's son. Now isn't this a treat? Sela took a step forward and moved right in front of me, cutting me off from the so-called magician. Leave him out of this. He doesn't have any knowledge of our world. She demanded furiously, but that last part stayed with me. Knowledge of our world? Just what are you talking about, Sela? You don't say. He nodded with a smile. He put his hand in the inner pocket of his coat and took out a cylindrical vial about the size of a beer bottle, which seemed to contain a red liquid. Wait, that shade of red, is that blood? He took off the cap. A glowing circle with a large number of signs and markings soon appeared around it and the liquid inside started moving by itself around Andrei's hand. A predatory grin formed on his face. Salida de Sange, he declared in a foreign language as the liquid took the form of a European spear. What in the world? I gasped in shock. Am I dreaming or am I seeing things? The blood turned into a spear. I was in shock and awe as I witnessed the whole scene, but Sela on the other hand seemed more on guard than shocked. Plasma manipulation? She asked the man. Sela didn't get a chance to continue, as the spear Andre was holding instantly expanded itself and stabbed her right in the abdomen. Ag! She whined in pain as the spear retracted from her body. She grabbed the wound, trying to stop the bleeding, but was interrupted by Andre, who arrived in front of her, glaring down her with a cold stare. You honestly expect me to believe that the son of that bastard isn't aware of his surroundings? Sela! I shouted as my mind finally comprehended what just happened. I dashed forward and clenched my fist to knock him down. Leave her alone. Wow, he replied casually as he dodged my fist. I couldn't believe how fast he was. Is this really all you can do? He asked with a bored expression as he kicked me in the ribs. Ag! I groaned in pain as I felt his knee digging into my abdomen. It felt like my ribs were cracking from the inhuman strength the man possessed. I had been in fights before, but this pain, was he really human? The sheer force of his blow sent me crashing towards the table, the wooden piece of furniture shattering on impact. I could feel splinters piercing my flesh. Shuru! Sela shouted desperately as she tried to help me, disregarding her own bleeding wound. I lifted my head, my vision blurry from the blow I just took, and I looked at the man who kicked me. He seemed rather confused by what he was seeing, but it only lasted for a moment before his confusion was quickly replaced by disbelief and an amused smile. Ha 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 ha. I can't believe it. He really isn't aware of the existence of the supernatural at all, is he? Stop. If you truly have grudge against Kuritsugu-sama, then take it out on me instead and leave the boy alone. She said to him coldly. I could see how much pain Sela was in. Her wound was still open, yet she is still trying to protect me. This is wrong. A grudge. He narrowed his eyes at her words. A derisive look began forming on his face as he continued. A grudge isn't a strong enough word to describe the amount of resentment I feel for that despicable man. I managed to resist the pain I was feeling. Please stop. It must be a mistake. You must have gotten Dad confused with someone else. I tried to reason with the man. There's no way this man is after Kuritsugu. He may have a rather stern and scary face sometimes, but he was a very kind and gentle man. His eyes narrowed on me, his smile dropping, and confusion could be seen in his eyes. Single quote. Are you really not aware what kind of monster your father truly is, lad? I looked at the man, confused even further by his words. The insides of my stomach felt as if they began tightening, a feeling of dread filling it. What are you talking about? His demeanor changed, his eyes were cold and serious, as he stared right into my eyes. Your father is the most brutal and heartless assassin the world has seen in the last couple of centuries. His name alone brings fear to most magic users, many of them choosing to run away when they hear the Magus Killer is coming after them to no avail. He declared coldly. I felt like something broke inside of my mind, my mouth began trembling uncontrollably. What? You heard me right, lad. Your father is a merciless killer who doesn't have any problem in slaughtering bystanders in order to eliminate his target. I felt like my blood turned to ice, my breathing going hectic, my hands and mouth trembling uncontrollably. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No. It was more precise to say that I didn't want to believe it. And know why you're lying. Dad wouldn't hurt anyone. Andre nodded slightly to my words. Oh, you are right, quite right. He wouldn't hurt someone. He would murder them and anyone who gets in his way in cold blood instead. I felt like my body was getting colder. This can't be real. I turned my head towards the only person who could reassure me and preserve my sanity. Sela. He is lying, right? I stuttered nervously as I looked at her desperately. Dad could never kill anyone, right? Sela averted her eyes from me. Shuru. She said with a trembling voice. No. I just felt like my very last rope to reality was just cut off and my body fell down into a cold and dark place. And no. It can't be. My eyes looked back at Andre. He just sighed tiredly. I don't know if I should be amused or pity you, lad. He straightened his body and prepared his blood spear. But no matter. You will die here and now after all. What? That was all I managed to say. It wasn't enough that I just found out that my father, the man that I respect and admire more than anyone in the world, is some kind of serial killer. And now, I am also about to become a victim as well. Personally, I have nothing against you. He nodded to himself tiredly. But I want that wretched man to feel the same pain I felt when he killed my brother. Sella's face seemed to have cringed. Why, you're the brother of Octavian Neculai, aren't you? She asked him in a strained voice, getting a reaction from the man in the form of a twitch. Kuritsugu-sama told me about him. He had a bounty placed on him for years and was one step away from murdering 50 newborn children for his experiments. You must realize that it was only a matter of time before he got killed. She told him calmly, probably hoping to reason with him. Please try to understand. He wouldn't have done it unless the situation demanded it. Your brother was bringing much shame with his illegal experiments. He could have caused an incident that would forever stain your family's name. He narrowed his eyes, they were cold and empty. Shut up. Sabia de Sange. He shouted, irritated as the blood spear changed its form into a European long sword. No. Andre raised the sword with both his hand and prepared to cut Sella in half. No. He swung the sword down. No. Seconds before the sword reached her, I jumped out in front of her, shielding her with my body. The sword slashed me, it started from my collarbone and it ended at my hip. I could now feel a deep wound throb all over the front of my body. Fresh blood erupted from the wound. I stared blankly in shock as my mind began to move. I wondered as I tried to take in everything before me. I saw that he was about to cut Sella and my body, despite my mind being stunned as it was from the recent revelations, moved on its own to protect her. I didn't even get to cry out in pain as I felt myself going numb as I fell to the floor. Sella screamed as she tried to help me. And no, Shuru. She didn't even notice that Andre's sword changed yet again, this time into a giant claw. Arg! She gasped in pain as the claw pinned her to the nearby wall. How interesting, Andre admitted to himself after taking a closer look at Sella. His eyes seemed to be locked on her snow-white hair and her ruby-red eyes. I did hear rumors that a homunculus of the highest quality was spotted together with that bastard, but I never imagined I would actually get to meet it myself. Let go of me, you brute. She demanded desperately, her body was struggling to break free from the hold. How could I do that without inspecting your design? He asked wickedly as 5 blood needles formed on the fingertips of his left hand. Without wasting a second to spare, he stabbed the needles into Sella's abdomen. Arg! She cried out in pain as she felt the man's blood-based weapon perforate her flesh. I could see those needles pump something inside of Sella, but what was he injecting her with using that weird blood of his? The man licked his lips in anticipation. It seems that my trip to this backwater country will also grant me some new research material. He noted to himself. From the floor I was witnessing everything with my own 2 eyes. The feeling of despair and helplessness was eclipsing the pain I was feeling from my wound. I felt as if my body was underwater and I was slowly drowning, falling further and further into a dark abyss. My consciousness was slowly fading away as I struggled to stay awake. The only thing that was keeping me from passing out were the pain-filled screams of Sella and my desire to do something. No, Sella. I have to save her. Move, damn it. I tried desperately to move my body, but it was useless. I couldn't even move my fingers, let alone my whole body. Why wouldn't my body move? I couldn't even talk anymore. The only thing left in my mouth was blood, the taste of Cooper filling it. I wanted so badly to throw up, but I couldn't. Damn. My eyes saw Sella's tearful visage. I could feel her pain just by watching what she was going through, but it was still useless. My body refused to listen to me. Get up. Get up. I have to get up. I have to find some strength left in my damn body. I was praying for a miracle to happen. I didn't care if it came from God or the devil, I just want to stop that man from hurting my family. Damn it all. My vision kept on getting darker, I couldn't even see her anymore, but I could still hear her pain-filled cries. I was cursing myself for being so helpless and weak. Time seemed to freeze. I was surrounded by darkness. An endless cycle started. Sela would scream and I would feel a bladed weapon run through my body every time she cried. I could feel something burn inside of my pocket. Pathetic. The voice of a man told me, a voice filled with both pity and disappointment. In this perpetual hell I was going through, I heard a voice. Yeah, I'm pathetic. I didn't care if I was going crazy or the blood loss was making me delirious, the man was right. I was pathetic. Weak. The man remarked again. Yeah, I'm weak. Never before in my life did I feel so much shame as I did now. I felt like a complete waste of life. Are you going to let her die? He asked me with a rather curious voice. No. I took a second and asked the voice. But what can I do? The voice was silent for a few moments, as if he was contemplating what to tell me. In the end the man sighed. Nothing, that's the cold truth. No, I muttered. I refuse to accept this. I don't care if he was right. I don't care if I was going to die. But, I refuse to let Sela die together with me. I refuse to give up. I muttered in pain, trying to struggle in my own mind, letting out a pained shout. I won't let him kill my family. The voice was silent as if he was judging me. Do you want the power to protect her? Yes. I responded without a moment to spare. Careful, this power comes at a price. He warned me. I don't care what price I have to pay. I shouted at him, if he could help me he should just do it and demand payment after he saved Sela. Are you sure? He asked me once again, only cold seriousness could be felt in his voice, something told me this was a life-changing decision. If you take this power you can no longer go back to the peaceful and happy days you once knew. The life you had will be gone. He gave me one last warning, his voice containing a little hesitation in it. I don't care. I told him coldly, feeling as if the last bit of my consciousness was leaving my body. If I don't do something, I will still lose everything, so I beg you, give me power to save my family. The man sighed tiredly. Very well, kid, just don't come crying to me that you regret this choice later. Just like that, as if a switch was turned on, I felt my body regain its strength. I snapped opened my eyes, my consciousness and senses had returned. I got back up on my feet, my body now burning with a foreign power. I didn't know what was going on anymore, yet I knew what I needed to do, as if someone was guiding me. I reached to the inside of my pocket and took out the card I received earlier. The card was glowing in a red light, all of a sudden the card flashed, it was no longer a blank card. On it the image of a person holding a bow pointed at the sky had taken form. A rage-filled flame burnt inside me as I looked at the man that was torturing the person I considered my big sister. 2 words. Just 2 words were going through my mind. I don't know from where they came from or just what they truly meant. But I knew they were the key that I needed. Install Archer. I shouted with all my might. At my shout both Andre and Sela looked at me. Neither of them seemed sure of what they were seeing before them. Not only did I manage to get back on my legs, but my body was covered in a powerful light that was changing my clothes. When the light died down I felt completely different. I looked at myself and saw that my clothes had changed completely. Instead of my school uniform I was now sporting black skin-tight sleeveless body armor, and a pair of metal-plated shoes which appeared to be attached to my black trousers. But the most intriguing part was a type of red cape tied around my waist, the matching red sleeve jacket I wore on my left arm tied over my chest with a knot, and lastly a red bandana was tied around my head. Letting aside the fact that my clothes probably looked like it belonged to some kind of anime badass, my very body felt different. It was as if my body felt heavy yet light at the same time. It was a very complex sensation. Sela's eyes were wide open in disbelief, trying to analyze what she was seeing before her. Shuru, she muttered in astonishment and confusion. Andre was just as taken aback as Sela was. No, he was far more stunned than her. Just what sort of magic is this? He demanded. I narrowed my eyes at him, my eyes locked onto his own, he froze, becoming completely rigid. It was like when a predator had selected its new prey, with the prey locked into place by its mere sight, unable to move. The magus instincts were telling him to run away, but he couldn't as his body refused to listen. One that does not concern you. I told him. Weird, my voice was distorted. Literally. My voice sounded like a mixture of my own and the man that spoke to me in my mind. I extended my arms wide to my sides. Strange. It felt so natural. I had never done this before, and yet it feels like I've done this hundreds of times. I know what to do. I knew what to say. Judging the concept of creation. Hypothesizing the basic structure. Duplicating the composition material. Imitating the skill of its making. Sympathizing with the experience of its growth. Reproducing the accumulated years. Excelling every manufacturing process. Trace on. I muttered strongly, green neon markings appearing on my shoulders, extending all the way to my palms. Energy, that was the closest thing I could identify to the electric-looking phenomenon that was dancing at the very tips of my fingers. In my left hand a white sphere formed, in my right however it was a black one. They began growing, changing, forming, and shaping themselves. When the process was completed, 2 Chinese falchions manifested in my hands. The swords mirroring each other in size and design, a yin-yang mark embedded in the base of each blade. Only their color making them different from one another, one of purest white, while the other of the darkest night with a red line pattern on it. It was the first time I saw them with my own eyes, but I knew them and their names, the married swords, Kansho and Bakuya. Interesting. This whole process of creating, no, that's not the right word, it's something else, yes, projection. This projecting process, even though I saw it carefully with my own 2 eyes, it took at most just a single second. I took a look back at the people present. Andre seemed perplexed, but managed to break out of his stupor. Quickly he composed himself while adopting a battle position, the blood weapon turning back into its liquid form and swirling around his hand. A sacred gear. Do you expect a pair of swords will be enough injure me? He asked arrogantly. No. I replied coldly with a confident smirk on my lips. I may not have any idea what this sacred gear thing is, but I knew for sure that what I am using aren't your average swords. I expect to defeat you with them. I told him as I put my weight on my right foot, building up the force in my body, before dashing forward. Fast. His eyes snapped wide as he saw my incoming attack. Even though he was so confident moments ago, now he seemed to realize that he had no other choice than to defend or else be instantly cut down. Scut de Sange. He shouted as the blood swirled around his front, taking the shape of a shield. My blades and his shield clashed together with the shield giving way. The swords didn't just overcome the defense of the shield, they sliced through it just like a pair of hot knives through butter. Andre didn't even have time to react as the swords sliced apart his protection, proceeding to cut into his palms, and severing some tendons along the way. Fresh blood erupted from them, making the man cry out in surprise and pain. How could those mere blades cut through my shield? He demanded from me. I didn't bother to reply and just casually threw my swords at him, stabbing him in his ribs on both his left and right sides. Arg! The man cried out in agony as the twin swords buried their way into his abdomen. Pain and fear were clouding his judgment, the look in his eyes showing the terror he felt, but he seemed to reach the conclusion that what he was facing wasn't something he could beat without going all out. That if he didn't do something right now, he knew without a shadow of a doubt everything would be over for him. He frowned while clenching his teeth in pain, a cyan glow manifesting around him and began flowing into the blood. The blood on his body and wounds levitated and took the form of hundreds of knives. He extended his left hand and declared in pained and desperate voice. Ploia de Sange. At his command the knives shot forward towards me, as if they were fired from a machine gun. From a side view one would believe that I was in trouble due to the large number of the knives heading toward me. But they didn't saw what I could see with my newly enhanced vision. Everything looked so slow. It wasn't that I knew the exact place the knives shall hit, but I could somehow calculate their aim, their speed, and the moment that they will land. I projected a new pair of Kancho and Bakuya and began blocking every single one of the incoming bladed projectiles by dodging, deflecting, slicing, and weaving through them. Not even a minute had passed before Andre ran out of his bloody ammo. He paled as he realized that his attacks were completely useless, that he used too much of his own blood in the process, that all hope for him was gone as his end stared him in the face. I saw the change in his attitude. I was never one to take pleasure in someone's suffering, but in this case I couldn't help but smirk at him. "Is that all?" I asked, but with my words something seemed to have snapped in the man. Rage, hatred, resentment. I could see the various emotions flicker in his eyes. I guess it didn't feel too good for him to get humiliated by the son of the man he was trying to get vengeance on. "Damn you!" he shouted as he lashed out desperately trying to punch me. A mistake. It was his last one. I simply took a step to the side and stabbed him in the legs with my swords. I wasn't done. I projected a new pair of blades and also stabbed him in the hands and then finally in the abdomen. By the time I was done, Andre looked like he fell into a pit filled with swords. Arg. He cried in agony as he fell to the ground and passed out. As angry as I was at him, I didn't stab any of his vitals or major arteries. I wouldn't kill, that was something I wouldn't stoop so low to do. I took a moment and looked at the man, confirming that he was out for the count. I changed my eyes to Sela. I walked slowly to her, a cold and serious expression was all over my face. "Shuru," Sela muttered when our eyes met. I lifted my sword and aimed it towards Sela. She closed her eyes in fear, probably expecting a horrible stabbing pain to hit her, but of course it never came. She slowly opened her eyes and saw that I was just cutting off the solidified blood that was keeping her pinned to the wall. When I was done, she breathed out in relief, probably thanking God that I didn't turn into some kind of psychotic killer. Our eyes met again. Weird. I could see my reflection in her red orbs. The reflection was so clear that I could see my own eyes. However, those weren't my eyes, they hadn't changed in shape or color, but it was the look in them. They were the eyes of a strong warrior, one who had seen far too much suffering and death, yet at the same time, they were still my eyes.